Okay, are we ready? First off, I need to make an apology because we've sort of framed all three of these conversations as Bible studies, and today I'm not planning to use the Bible at all. I'm sick of it, tired of the Bible. It's a hassle. So hopefully you have been around for some context for the last couple of Sundays, and if you haven't, those classes are online on our YouTube, and you probably got an email about them. And I'm just looking, I know I don't have enough of these pages. Where have you people all been? There's so many more of you today. Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you one, Janet, and then I'm going to, this is how, so pass them back. And, yeah, and pass them back, and as many as can get it. And let me tell you, like I've said each week, if you didn't get the notes, let me know, and I'll come up with a copy for you. Let's say a prayer before we get started on this. Thank you, oh God, for your presence here with us today. Thank you for the concern we have for our church, for our denomination, for our future. We pray that you would bless us and give us wisdom. Give us grace as we deal with one another, and understanding about what's the best course of action. But most of all, God, I pray that you would help us to know your will, and then to be willing and have the courage to follow your will. Amen. Throughout this process, I've been kind of tooting my own horn that I'm trying not to give away what I think should happen or where we should go or what we should do. But as I worked on this session today, I think it comes out pretty clear what I think. And I'm sorry. I tried to be objective, but I'm open to having my mind changed. Sometimes it scares me how much my mind has changed through the years, and pretty recently. I mean, it keeps changing. For example, about a year ago, I preached a sermon, and I don't even remember what the sermon was about, but after it was over, Nancy Reed came up to me and she said, "That's quite a change from what you would have said a few years ago, Pastor." And to that, I mostly think I'm glad. I want to be open to new understanding, new information. I want to be open to the voice of God. First off, first section, our current situation. I want to start with where we are, what our church looks like, and several members of our leadership council are here. And if we have questions about what this current situation really looks like, maybe some of them will be willing to chime in. And then I've outlined what seem to me to be the three most obvious options of what we can do. Our current situation is that our average attendance right now is about 70 people. The last few Sundays, I think there have been a few more than that, but that's about how many people we have. Our finances are not looking good. Our giving is considerably down this year. For the last 4 years, I believe, Chet can clarify this, the endowment has been subsidizing our budget to a certain extent. Our budget, at the current rate, our budget for next year is going to have to be adjusted because things aren't looking good financially. Yes?
And also the child care
yeah, that's exactly true. And the child care pops up later in this report, but the child care pays us rent at kind of a god-awful rate. Chet, can you tell us how much they're getting? $10,000 a month we get from the child care. And we're still kind of in trouble. This summer, there have been several times when our cash on hand, what is that word? It's not cash flow has been kind of dangerous. The endowment is in good shape. There's about $3 million there. But the governing board, the board that oversees the endowment, is restricted on how it can disperse funds. There are basically 3 categories: service to others, which is what we mostly know about and we see on one Sunday in the fall when we have a group of people representing organizations who get money from the endowment. The trustees get a good chunk of funds for maintenance to the building, major problems when they come along. And then just recently, there's a certain amount, a small amount, that's given to the finance committee to help meet the budget. Then one thing to notice, to have in our minds in terms of our current situation, is what we call the trust clause. We don't call it the trust clause, it is the trust clause. This was 1790 something. This was put in the original Book of Discipline as the church moved from England to America. The trust clause became the trust clause. And all United Methodist churches have this phrase in their deed. It says, "In trust, that said premises shall be used, kept, and maintained as a place of divine worship of the United Methodist Ministry and members of the United Methodist Church, subject to the discipline, usage, and ministerial appointments of said church, as from time to time authorized and declared by the General Conference and by the annual conference within whose bounds the said premises are situated." Now, obviously, I was not here, well, none of us were here when this building was constructed. Some of you were here when Fink Hall was built, right? Does anybody have a good memory of Fink Hall going up? Now, I'm going to say something about what should have taken place. I'm not saying this did take place, but what should have taken place, according to the trust clause, is that because this is a United Methodist building, this is a United Methodist property, we couldn't just decide to build Fink Hall. There were the local license permits that were required, but there's also a district and a conference board of church location and building. And because all of the properties of the United Methodist Church belong to all of the churches and all of the members of the church, you can't just go add on to it or move it somewhere else or knock it down because we all get a say in it. This was, honestly, John Wesley came up with this idea. The idea is that we're all connected to each other. Our building is our building, and we have a special love for it, but we are also connected to Trinity UMC. And their building is kind of our building too, because we're United Methodists and we're connected to each other. Here's something interesting that I think a lot of people don't even know. Because of the way our connection works, you're a pastor of or you're not a pastor, you're a member of a local congregation. So most of you are members of this church. Some of you probably have not become members of the church, but most of you are members of this congregation. Because I am ordained, I'm in a different category. I'm itinerant, and I have to go wherever the bishop tells me to go. So I don't get to be the member of a church. I'm a member of the annual conference. Because we're all connected. John Wesley. Properties that need to be considered when, let's see. All church properties are held in trust. Every member has ownership. There, I already said all that. Our properties that need to be considered include the church building, including the Family Life Center and the child care, 2 lots across the street over here, the church parsonage, which you can't see from here. It's way up north, and the church endowment and any other investments that we have. Those are all property, not of us, but property of the United Methodist Church. We're responsible for those things. We control those things, but they don't belong to us. And that's something you and I didn't agree to that, but 175 years ago, some people did. Well, you got to look up there to see our 175th. So I came up with what I think are 3 options. And honestly, the 3 options are things that I've heard some of you say. Each of them I've heard people say. Are you ready? Option number 1, leave the United Methodist Church. This would require closing the church and reopening it as a different entity. This would essentially be a paperwork issue and would hardly be noticed by most members of the congregation. That is, that we would have a final service as Central United Methodist Church on December 31st, and then our next service on January 7th, we would meet here just like always, but we would be a different entity, a different church. However, there will be costs to this option. Bishop Trimble has indicated that there is a task force working on this issue, and they will issue instructions and procedures by the end of this summer. There was a video that Bishop Trimble put out a month ago, 6 weeks ago, where he talked about this. I tried to forward it to you all, but when I went back to find it, it was gone. So maybe he's pretending like he never said it, but he did say it. Our district superintendent, Mitch Gisselman, has confirmed this. I had a meeting with him about 3 weeks ago, and I asked him this specific question. And he said the procedure will likely be based on paragraph 2549 of the discipline, which deals with the closing of churches and the disposition of church properties. So basically what would happen is the church would close, and then we would have to make some kind of arrangement with the conference, who represents all the other churches and all the other Methodist members. We would have to make some kind of arrangement with them to maintain our status as a church in this place. So, here are some things that we would lose. And this is where I feel like I start showing my hand. We lose the benefits of being a United Methodist Church. That includes missions, including the United Methodist Committee on Relief, and local missions such as the United Methodist Youth Home. Now, you can say, well, we can still give to UMCOR, or we can still support the youth home, which is true. We still can do those things. But every month, we give a tithe to the United Methodist Church. And a part of that tithe, so our tithe is based on essentially 10% of our offering. So whatever you put in the plate this morning, which hopefully was more than you put in last week, whatever was in the plate this morning, 10% of that is going to the UMC, big UMC. And out of that 10% that they get, they collect it from all the churches. Part of it goes to the United Methodist Youth Home to support the staff and the program over there. We'll not be a part of that anymore if we close our church and reopen. We'll lose our connection to and support of healthcare services around the world, including the Methodist Hospital, Riley Hospital for Children. There's a connection with IU Health that is all because of Methodist Hospital, which is supported by the United Methodist Church. We'd lose our connections to UM-related educational institutions, including the University of Evansville and 2 other colleges in Indiana, DePaul and the University of Indianapolis, our United Methodist schools. There are other schools, secondary schools and seminaries for pastors across the country. We'd lose all those connections. We would lose the efficiency, and this one's a more practical nuts and bolts issue for us, for any church, not just us. We would lose the efficiency with which United Methodists get a new pastor. Not only that, we would also be handed the task of vetting pastors ourselves. As it currently stands, the Conference Board of Ordained Ministry examines all candidates for ministry. To me, the great thing about our itinerant appointment system, and I'm going to speak, obviously I have some feelings as a pastor why it's great, but I'm going to try to tell you why I think it's great for a church. Let's say the bishop calls and wants me to move next year on July 1st. That means whatever the last Sunday in June is, would be my last Sunday as your pastor. The next Sunday, you have a new pastor. A new pastor whose credentials have already been confirmed and checked by by educational leaders, by the Board of Ordained Ministry. That pastor has the same, not necessarily experience, but the same background, the same, what's the word? It's education, but it's more than education. So the Board of Ministry makes sure that an ordained pastor has a Master of Divinity degree from an approved seminary. You can't just go to any seminary and get any degree and be a United Methodist pastor. There are requirements. And just because you have that degree doesn't mean you get to be a pastor. Then you have to write papers about your beliefs and your experience, your testimony, where you came from in life. And then you have to go through an interview process. And then there's a probationary period. All of that stuff that weeds out. I know some of you are thinking it didn't weed out you. That weeds out candidates who would not be effective. We would have to do all that on our own. I mean, we would have to verify, not we. It's July 1st. I'm in another church someplace because I had a job here last week and now I have a job somewhere else next week. That's the good part for me. But now you've got to find a pastor and figure out if he's telling you the truth about his education and what his experience is and why he left his last church. In our system, we sort of have an ending that maybe there was a problem in the last church, but somebody's overseeing this guy or this woman, and they know what the problem was, and they're not sending us somebody who's going to be a disaster. I talked too long about that. I'm sorry. That one's kind of close to home. We would also lose our connection. We talked a little bit about this with the trust clause. The UMC is built on what we call connectionalism. Our churches and people are all part of the same community. And the example I've added here is our Lenten worship services with other United Methodist churches in town. If we were not United Methodist, those would have never happened. And I just got to tell you, from a personal standpoint, the pastors of those 4 churches that do these services together, we've been meeting, having lunch together every month. We get together and we don't do anything, probably nothing any of you would be remotely interested in. But let me tell you, I can tell you who the most troublesome members of all their churches are. And we laugh. Pardon me?
Is that gossiping?
It's probably gossiping. We like to think of it as supporting one another. Oh man, I'm sorry you have to go through that. Well, I told you when I understood that there was enough turmoil in our church about these issues and I was going to have to deal with it, I went to that group and we're sitting in a restaurant. We were sitting over here on Green River Road at Yak and Yeti. And I said, hey, I got this problem. I thought we were going to be okay, but we're not okay. We got to talk about this and we got to deal with it. Do you guys have any suggestions? And it was one of those pastors who said to me, well, you start by saying, we all love each other. And we love this church. And we want to try to figure out how we can make everybody happy and keep the church together, as opposed to starting with this side's over here and this side's over here and we're going to fight with each other. Anyway, it's been valuable to me personally, that meeting. Financial cost. According to the recent disaffiliations that took place, which we're all aware of, departing churches were required to pay 2 years of pastoral pension payments and 2 years of apportionments, or the tithe that I mentioned before, the 10% that we give to the conference. That was the expectation of every church who disaffiliated. So the trust clause that says all the churches belong to all of us, there was kind of an exemption. If you paid this fee, you get to keep your building, you get to keep all your property. There may have been other expenses involved in this, but I'm thinking that was it. 2 years of apportionments, 2 years of pension. Maybe there was retiree insurance in there. Anyway, the bottom line is, even if it's just the 2 years of those two things, that would require us to pay about $100,000. But there's no guarantee that that's what's going to happen, because they're working on this. I'm just trying to give you something to think about. What did we say? Paragraph 2549 and how it's applied will be there too. Here's the last thing. There will be a membership cost for leaving the UMC. So if our current attendance is 70 people, my prediction is that if we leave the church, if we leave the denomination, we'd lose at least 20%. I don't really have I have no survey, I have no data that supports that. I just picked what I think makes sense, 20%. That means we'd have 55 people in worship. If we only have 55 people, that means we have less money to support programs that we're already having a hard time supporting. So we would have to decrease programs and staff, which likely we're going to have to look at for next year anyway. Then I put in italics this section because it doesn't really fit in the outline, but it's important, and I know a lot of people are wondering about it. Many people have wondered about the safety of our endowment funds. If we had decided that closing the church is our best option, then we can separate the endowment from the church as a private foundation or some other entity that would be independent of Central. This could preserve the fund. However, that seems like a last resort. It might not be an issue at all. My view of the endowment, and let me tell, I have nothing. I'm one of 12 people on that committee, right? I'm just the one who has the microphone. The endowment, the funds that we have in the endowment should be used the way our congregation wants to use them, the way they've been given, and to support what we're doing. So we should figure that out. That should be a priority for us, no matter what happens going forward. Option number 2. So option number 1 was we leave the denomination. Option number 2 is we do nothing and embrace the idea of being an affirming church. That means that we embrace, we decide we're going to be, yes, bring us a gay pastor. Yes, we're going to marry gay couples. This would not include the stress and complication and the losses of finances and sort of connection that leaving the UMC would, but the losses to our congregation would be significant. Like in option one, our attendance goes down, our giving goes down, everything goes down. Everything's a disaster. And, you know, Janet's sitting closest to me, so I'm going to pick on Janet. Janet and I, we fight all the time about this issue of gay pastors. Now, just for the sake of all of you, we have never had a conversation about that. One time, Janet called me and left me a message, please call me, I want to talk about this. And I didn't get a chance to call her back. She went on vacation. She came back and I said, what was it you wanted to talk about? And she said, did I call you? So we've never really had this conversation. But here's the thing, I love Janet. Janet's pretty important to our church. And if she and I are on opposite sides of this one issue, it's going to be pretty hard for me to stand firm on my ground if it means that Janet is going to leave. I'm just trying to make you think about real people. That's number two. Number three, the option is mind our own business. And I just like the name of this option, mind our own business. So there are two main issues. One is gay pastors. Although the UMC is itinerant, meaning that pastors go where they're sent and churches accept pastors that come to them, a congregation does engage with the district superintendent in a process of discernment. So as soon as a church knows the pastor's leaving, the DS shows up and does a whole questionnaire. There's a whole conversation about what are the needs of this church, what kind of pastor would fulfill those needs. Each appointment is made by the bishop but affirmed by a local staff parish relations committee. Let me tell you what happened when we were appointed here. The first time we ever set foot in Evansville was that day that we were meeting with the staff parish committee. And we met over in the library and we talked for a little while, and I thought it was a good conversation. And then the superintendent said, why don't you guys leave, me and Shannon, why don't you guys leave and we'll just talk about that, we'll talk about things. So we walked down the hall. I peeked in the pastor's office to see where I maybe would be working, but it was dark and I couldn't see in there. And we came on down and we sat here in the sanctuary, about somewhere between where Heather is sitting and where Mary is sitting, somewhere right in there. And we just sat. And we sat there forever. I don't know what was going on. I can't remember who was. I know Charlie was in there and Ron was in there. I don't remember who else was in there. I don't know what I did to make you have such doubts about me, but that conversation went on forever. And then eventually the superintendent came out and he said, how are you guys doing? And I said, I'm ready for this to be done. And then he went back in and we still sat here. there was some kind of consultation that was going on in that room. There's some input that's allowed for a congregation. At the time of a pastoral change, SPRC, the Staff Parish Committee, could inform the DS that a gay pastor would or would not be an acceptable appointment for Central. Just like you would maybe say, we can't have a pastor who raises Doberman pinchers, because there is a rule in the neighborhood the parsonage is in that dogs have to be small. The second issue is gay weddings. And this is the one I'm not sure. The gay pastors, I think that's a pretty realistic and legitimate approach. Gay weddings, I'm not sure about. My suggestion is that the Leadership Council can develop a policy that determines the appropriateness of each wedding on a case-by-case basis. The pastor could report to the committee about upcoming weddings, and together they can schedule weddings that are appropriate. This will eliminate the need for the church to make a blanket statement about gay marriage and will allow for flexibility in the future. Mind our own business, embrace the change and the focus of the denomination, or cut our losses and get out. Those are what I see as our three options. Now, there are 10 minutes left in our time. Questions, comments? Ron. I'm surprised that you have a comment, Ron.
I think the overriding question, and these three are really important, but the overriding question to me is, if we continue staying together, we're going to go broke, right? There's a likelihood we're going to struggle financially. And so you can do any one of those three, and you're still going to struggle financially. And so we had talked at one time, and I know Trinity approached us about doing some kind of a merger. I know Old North is struggling. So has there been any conversations when you've had your lunch meetings with these other pastors about getting together?
I think there's been unspoken conversations. You know, we kind of dance around these issues. We all understand that we're kind of in the same situation. And even the churches, you know, we think Methodist Temple is stronger and that probably Aldersgate is stronger, but none of us have people breaking down the doors. I will tell you that the pastor at Old North, Dan Ashton, has recently joined our group, and when we come up to Lent next year, they'll be participating with us. So those conversations are happening. Honestly, when I first initiated this process of this connection with these other churches, it was exactly because of this issue of human sexuality. Because I felt like there were going to be some people, there would potentially be some people who would be disenfranchised, and I think it's a good idea that we're connected with one another so we're comfortable with each other. So that if, for example, if our church, if Central becomes an affirming congregation, then we have relationships with these other congregations, and we can say, hey, I know that the direction we're going is not for everybody, but this church over here that you already know, you've already worshiped there, they might be for you. So that's sort of the underlying framework. I'm not opposed to that conversation, and I think our situation is, did I repeat what Ron's comment was? That's because we don't want you to know. Ron's comment was basically about no matter which one of these options we choose, or if there's another option, we still have some long-term financial concerns. And he's asking about the possibility of merger, for example, with Trinity or with Old North. From my perspective, those things, that would not be off the table. The question is, how do we go about doing that? We have this giant building. They have a giant building. We love our building. It's beautiful. And they love their building. Also beautiful.
There are consultants that will guide you through a process like that. They're available and they're here in Evansville. They will do that. But I think you make a really good point. If you merge, and Trinity and I already know from several members over there, the position of Todd, their pastor, which direction he's going to go, they're going to split that church up. Same as if we had a vote here, we're going to split this church up. And so you would end up, in all likelihood, with two separate churches. Now, they may be separate and stronger, but they're still going to be separate in their core beliefs
Right.
on this subject. But financially, you still have that big issue facing us.
I think Ron has reiterated his point that even if there is a split, that we're still going to have those issues, and that there are people, consultants, who can help us work through some of those logistical things. I think certainly we're planning, or Chet is planning a meeting later this summer, next month, to have a frank conversation about the finances and what the future looks like. And from my perspective, all of these things should be on the table, including a merger. Maybe it means that, maybe it means Trinity and Central, and I did my hands backwards from where they are. Maybe it means that that becomes one church, but in two locations, sharing one pastor, maybe sharing two pastors. Paula? Yeah, a merger, Paula says a merger probably is in our future, or at least the conversation has to be in our future, but she's making the distinction, which is true, that it's different than the issue before us. It may be a solution to our financial problem, but it's not a solution to our human sexuality problem. Charlie, I'll come back to you because somebody over here, was somebody over here have a hand up? Kent? Well, tell the conference to mind their business, not we have to mind our business. Well, the thing is, we have told them. The United Methodist Church is not a democracy in one sense. We're an Episcopal system. Episcopal is the Greek word that we translate bishop. So we have a bishop who kind of is the figurehead who runs stuff, who makes decisions, but a bishop can't decide the beliefs of the church or the practices of the church. The bishop is more an administrator. So each year, every annual conference has a meeting, usually 2 or 3 days. And every church within our annual conference is Indiana. Every church in Indiana gets represented at this annual conference by one vote for one pastor and one lay person. And those two people represent our church. Up until this year, that was me as the pastor and Gloria as our lay member to annual conference. Speaking of which, we need somebody for next year to represent us, to make sure that our voice is heard. Each year, or each 4 years, the general conference meets. The delegates for the general conference are elected by the annual conference from the members of the annual conference. So Gloria got to vote for who she wanted the lay people to represent Central were, and I got to vote for who I wanted the clergy people. So in a sense, the people who made this decision are us. It's like there are a bunch of us who, is election day November 6th? November 5th, somewhere in there?
6, 7.
What, 5th? Is that what you said, Gracie? It's not important. We're going to have the election, and within a few days, hopefully after that election, a bunch of us are going to be unhappy. Probably, if statistics are right, about half of us, November 5th, probably half of us are going to be unhappy about it. But we all got to have a say in it. We all get to vote on November 5th. We may lose, our person may lose, but we get to have a say. Yes?
Is there anyone in the church that knows, and so with your point in number 3, we talk about the SDRC could inform the DS that a gay pastor would or would not be acceptable. Is there anyone that's been on committees here who can tell me if we have ever refused a pastor that they sent to this church?
Well, Ron, you were the guy when I came.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we've never rejected someone. We've had questions, but we've never rejected someone.
There were questions, and I sat out here for a really long time.
My concern is I just wondered if, if you do have questions, because it's always been my understanding, they appoint the pastor. And I've not been, and I don't know for sure if that's something that you can say, we don't want that pastor. That was just the question that I asked.
If there was a real objection or something like this, now that this issue is out there, that may be one of the prerequisites, one side or another, that would be required for that pastor to be appointed here.
And it has been done with the associate.
Say that again, Chet?
We have refused our total of our concern so vigorously. This is 20 years ago.
Okay. So Chet's saying that at one point an associate pastor was refused or declined, or there was an arrangement made so that he wouldn't. Gloria?
My understanding too, because with Chris, is that the nominee, you, when you were here, you were talking to the SPRC people, you had the right to say, I don't want to go to that church. If you had felt like this was not a welcoming situation for you, you could have said no. So therefore, if there were a gay candidate and they came and they listened to what was going on, they could say, I don't think I
Yeah.
can be there. So if you go,
That's a good point. Gloria points out that it goes the other way too, that a pastor could pull the plug, and if it was a gay candidate who got questioned about sexual preference or gender identity or any of those sort of hot button things, he could say, or she could say, no, or they could say, no, I'm not going there. I can't go there. I've never turned down an appointment. I've always been afraid if I turn down an appointment, the bishop, the next one may be a lot worse. But that's just me. Okay, Charlie?
What does the conference consider when it comes time to merge two churches? Do they get involved in that, or how does that work?
Yeah, there would be I don't know. He's asking, what would the conference be involved in some kind of merger? And my answer is yes, they would be. I don't know how that would be, but we talked about the trust clause. That would be two or more properties that decisions would have to be made about what's going to happen to those properties. So, for example, I don't know. Let's say Trinity and Old North, because they've been brought up. Let's say the three of our churches were going to merge. I don't think Trinity has a parsonage. Does Old North? Does anybody know? They do? Yeah. So, if there's one pastor, even if you keep the three church buildings, what do you do with that extra parsonage? And so the whole connection has a say or has a stake in what happens to those properties. So, and the appointment would be the same. So, I don't want to say bad things about our system because I've tried to make it seem pretty good. But there are some bad things about our system from a congregation standpoint that are actually pretty good for me. We have kind of a seniority system. And I'm an old guy. I have a nice salary compared to other pastors. I've not done this research. I just, compared to other pastors, I'm doing okay. If there were a change in who the pastor's going to be or what the roles of the pastors will be, the superintendent will definitely have to be involved to know what kind of appointments required. Because maybe I would still be the pastor, but the appointment would be different. It wouldn't be that I would be the pastor of Central anymore. It would be that I would be the pastor of whatever the new church is called. And there would be a new compensation package. And there would have to be discussions about what percent of the salary does Trinity pay versus how much does Central pay. And if the pastor's going to live in the parsonage at Central, does that mean that Trinity has to pay toward the utilities of the parsonage? So there would be a lot of conversations that would take place. Yes, Ashley.
It's somewhat unrelated, honestly, but if that happens, and so we no longer, let's say we would no longer use this building, what happens to the childcare? Does it close down?
We would firebomb it. She asked what would happen to the child care. The child care is a huge, not just a ministry for our church, but for the community. that's going to be a primary consideration for any kind of merger. So it will not be forgotten. We may not be happy with the way it turns out, but we'll be considering it. Paula?
The Catholics done sometimes the mergers that they keep the facility, and I think they even have services that more than one. There may be one main one, but they keep the facilities like some people are married in the, say, would be Trinity or whatever. And I would think with the child care, we keep the child care, and it would be more than one church would have sale, they would have sale to that church.
The overwhelming sentiment is that this is going to get very complicated before it gets resolved. Think of all the possibilities that come to just say, it's complicated.
It's complicated, that's right. Linda's had her hand up for a long time.
And this might be stating the obvious, but if we're going to talk about mergers, I think that has to be part of the conversation as to our decision to stay or go. Because if Trinity were to stay and be confirming like a Methodist church, they would not merge with us if we had voted to. So I think a merger comes.
That's right, and that's why I think, well, and this goes back, I think it was Paula who mentioned earlier. Linda says that we need to take first things first and decide what we believe before we plan to merge, because it wouldn't make sense for us to merge with a congregation who believed something different than we do. And I think that goes back to Paula's comment earlier that this is an important conversation that we probably need to be having, but to my way of thinking, I'm just a pastor. I'm not a person who has a head for administrative financial stuff. More important than how we pay the bills is what we believe. That's who we are. That seems to be a bigger issue for me. Okay, I'm going to take, if there's one more comment or question, because we're already way over the time I was thinking. Five seconds. Oh, Nancy, we were so close.
Sorry, what's the next step?
Well, officially, I know Stan is upstairs at the soundboard. Nancy wants to know what the next step is. Officially, the next step is if you have feelings about any of these options or some other option, tell Stan or Chet or I'm losing track of who else you could tell. Gloria, Melissa. Melissa's on the council. Or me. Who am I missing? Ken Schreiber, who left. That's why it was tea time, right? Tell them what your feeling is, and the council will hash it over, and we'll try to figure out what would be in the best interest of the congregation and what the congregation truly wants to do. Well, that's, Kent wants to know if members and non-members get to vote. That will be something, if we get to a vote, we'll have to explore what the who qualifies to vote? I would think membership certainly would be a requirement to vote on something like this, because if it's not a requirement, I'm going to call everybody I know who agrees with me and have them show up, and I will stuff the ballot box. Oh, Linda.
If we get to a vote, or if we get to a decision, like when will that be? I mean, this summer or next?
Well, if we think we need to leave, we're not going to know anything about the requirements to leave until the end of the summer. That's what the bishop said, that will happen by the end of the summer. And I think we're not going to waste time on this. You know how... Go ahead, Daryl.
If we decide to just leave well enough alone, and I'm going to ask you a question, I know you're not going to have the answer. Do you have any idea how long you will be here? What I'm getting at,
I've been trying to get out of here for 10 minutes, Daryl.
well, if it works for Gabby, we will. What I'm getting after is, if you're going to be here till you're 71, what's that, 9, 10 years from now? At that point, we don't have to worry about having a gay minister. You're here, right?
I can't imagine it lasting that long. Daryl wants to know how long I'm going to be the pastor here. I'll just be honest with you all. I thought for the longest time that I was going to go to a maximum, mandatory retirement at 72. And I got no real reason to be unhappy with this situation. You all are great. I know that's a politically good thing for me to say, but I really mean it. Last year when we bought a house in another community, that kind of changed the way I think about that. I'm thinking 4 or 5 years now. But if the bishop called and said, hey, we have this church in the town where you just bought this house, that would be pretty enticing. So I don't know. Just leave well enough alone? No. I don't see any reason why I'm leaving, at least for that many years, 4 or 5 years yet. I'm 61, 65 is the magic number, right? Because I can't afford to go to the doctor. And as I get older, I go to the doctor more. Thank you all for your attention and your civility for these weeks. Honestly, I have been so nervous and dreading this all. Now, maybe you're all talking bad about me when you leave, and maybe you're all ready to, stone me or something. But I appreciate your attentiveness and your openness to really think about what the issues are, and to sort of at least give me the opportunity to try to get beyond the talking points. So let's say a prayer and we'll be done. Lord God, thanks for this place, but more than that, thanks for these people. Lord, I thank you for the expression that I hear over and over again, we're like a family. And I appreciate, God, the love that we have for one another and the concern we have for our church. I pray that you would continue to speak to us and guide us as we move forward with more difficult conversations. Lead us to what you want for our congregation. Amen. Thank you, guys.